So today we will be discussing one of my favorites, two of my favorites. We got Booker T. Washington and we got W.E.B. Du Bois. And it's also focusing on the Harlem Renaissance. So we got three topics to discuss today. Let's take our time. So we have the Harlem Renaissance, which was a culmination of change and attitude that had begun 2 decades earlier before the Harlem Renaissance started. It was a shift in philosophy from accommodating white domination to demanding equal status and recognition for blacks. Critic W.E.B. Du Bois became one of the major voices of the new attitude when he first stated plainly the conflict that was to define much of the 20th century in his groundbreaking book. In his groundbreaking book, The Souls of Black Folks, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Since the emancipation of slaves in 1863, the traditional doctrine of race relations was one of accommodation. Uh, for blacks, that meant don't make any waves and you won't be lynched. Lynch means to put someone to death by mob action without legal authority. Booker T. Washington, the most prominent African American at the time, strongly supported the principle of non confrontation. And he made a famous speech at the Atlanta Exposition on September 18th, 1895. And he said, the wisest among my race understands that the agitation of questions of social equality is the extremist folly. Washington was a practical man. To his logic, what African Americans needed most were jobs, not equality. Even today, we need jobs, but we also need equality. They needed to put food on the table and pay the rent. Washington believed that to pursue any higher learning was not only impractical, but dangerous for blacks. He was a member of the first generation of blacks who have been born free, as well as the first African American to ever receive a PhD. W.E.B. Du Bois was deeply offended by what he saw as Washington's surrender. W.E.B. Du Bois believed that the future prosperity of blacks in America lay in men and women like himself, educated African Americans. He coined the term the talented 10th to describe the 10% of black population who were educated and relatively affluent. In his famous essay, The Talented 10th, education must not simply teach work, it must teach life. So, authentic blackness. Blacks were referred among polite white company as Negroes, but the term clearly used by whites to mean ignorant, unskilled, rural, and southern. In short, African Americans were considered all around inferior. Du Bois himself, a highly educated northern born intellectual who was extremely proud of his accomplishments, as he and his peers looked out at American culture, they saw no representation of their black selves. They argued that it was impossible to make conclusions about African Americans in mass because not all blacks look alike, or think alike, or live alike, or even worship alike. Blacks began creating their own organizations to free themselves not only from white expectations but also from white control. So we have Booker T. Washington with his method of non confrontation, don't ask questions, just work, and you'll get where you have to be. Then you have Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, highly educated, ask questions. We want equality, we want a better life, In education, he says it must not just
Teach you facts.
it must teach you life. I like both viewpoints. I live by both viewpoints. I'm in the middle. I know I have to work for what I have, and I don't expect anyone to give me anything. I'm gonna work for whatever I have to get. So that's what we have. Harlem Renaissance. Excuse me. Harlem Renaissance. W.E.B. Du Bois. Booker T. Washington.
And
That's our episode. Goodbye.